Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, specifically Jeff, Eliza, Larry. Nice to see your faces. Gonna give people just another minute to come in here. Our waiting room's still creeping up pretty quick. We're tapering off a little bit. Happy Blue Jays opening day to those who celebrate. Does anyone have tickets? I looked earlier and they were like $120 for way up in the bleachers. And I was like, nope, I can't do that today. All right, folks, we seem to be getting a little bit more steady here, so I'll kick us off. First and foremost, happy Friday. As said in the chat, happy Blue Jays opening day. Happy Focus Friday. Happy first Friday back after March break. If you're someone who celebrates a March break, and happy, next week's a short week, so happy last full week before a short week, too. It is so fantastic to be here with you all. I'm Tiffany MacLennan. I'm your host of Focus Friday. If you've been here before, you know the drill. But if this is your first time attending Focus Friday, basically how these things work is that we just try to get people to come together and chat about cool things. Uh, the goal is to be very casual, to come in, drink a coffee, learn something new, maybe make a friend along the way, um, but primarily just to give a space for people to come in and connect and be able to ask questions, chat with experts from different fields, and maybe talk about something that, maybe isn't your everyday topic. So hopefully that you all find this interesting and a good use of your Friday afternoon for probably some of you, morning for another group of you. Last week, if you missed it, we did 2 weeks ago, Focus Fridays bi-weekly. We did a kind of how AI works within an institution as a conversation. So we had multiple people from the University of Alberta come in to talk about what does implementing AI look like across an institution. So we had people come in from their library, from their IT services, from their graduate student services, to really kind of talk about what things like that triangulation looks like across an institution for implementing AI. So if you haven't seen that episode and you think it would be interesting, it's on our YouTube, Higher Education Strategy Associates. You can find it, watch it. And of course, in the email that you received this morning that would have led you here, there's a summary of that conversation. And now, without further ado, on today's topic, I am so excited to have Lindsey Fair here with me. Lindsey is the VP of Marketing and Communications at Invest Ottawa. And Lindsey, I'm sorry if that's not your full title. I forgot to write it down because I'm just so used to having you here. I'm so used to working with Lindsey now. I think she's fantastic. Invest Ottawa, if you haven't been in Ottawa, the most gorgeous building in Ottawa, hands down. So it's a great spot. Lindsey, I'll give you a second to introduce yourself and kind of your role and what Invest Ottawa does, and then I'll hop in with some questions for you.
Amazing. Thanks, Tiffany. It is a super cool space. That's Bayview, and that's the second part of the title is Bayview Impact. But you did a great job, Tiffany. And so I'm new to working in economic development and working with Invest Ottawa. I started last May. Before that, I spent 17 years in higher ed. And then before that, I was in economic development and owned my own company. And so I've kind of bridged the worlds of economic development, public sector, higher education, and industry. And so I'm very excited about today's conversation. Invest Ottawa is the lead economic development corporation in Ottawa, particularly focused on the knowledge economy. We have one of the most complex R&D facilities in the country called Area X.0. Our largest contract is with the Department of National Defence and Transport Canada. It is a smart mobility testing facility, so we test autonomous tanks, drones, and so on at this facility. And then we also help the startup ecosystem. So Bayview is our accelerator and incubator. So we have about 100 startup companies on site with us, including a smart farm, or not a smart farm, sorry, a vertical farm. We have a smart farm at Area X, but at Bayview, we have a vertical farm. And then we also are the foreign direct investment agency for the city as well. And so half of our building at Bayview is our landed company. So we were Amazon Canada's first office, as an example. We were Shopify's first we were the incubator that got them off the ground. So when you think about what we do, it's the breadth of all of those things. Um, and so I have not left the higher ed industry, which is why I still kind of get to keep talking with you, Tiffany. So having worked at the University of Victoria before this, and then before that I was at SAIT Polytech, or just SAIT in Calgary, and before that I was at Queen's University. So I've worked in higher ed across 3 provinces, and I've worked at U15 and non-U15 and a Polytech. And then I taught at St. Lawrence College for 15 years. So I also worked at a college and on the professor side. Mhm. So that's kind of me. Oh yeah, and I quit all of this for a little while and was an artist when I had my son too. So just on the little creative side, I did encaustic painting, which is painting with beeswax. So
I actually did not know that about you, and that is super cool. I'm excited for whatever my little life sabbatical will be at some point.
yeah,
Whatever the passion project will be. Uh, and Lindsay mentioned the vertical farm in the Bayview uh,
yeah,
actual building in Ottawa. And folks, we were there in the end of January, and I walked in and they were showing examples from the vertical farm, and there was real strawberries that just like, the ones you get in the summer that are perfectly red and perfectly, and I was the most happy I think I've been in January ever, period. And it was great. So Lindsay, thank you for, investing in things like that to bring people joy. Um, Now I brought Lindsay in today because a lot of you have been asking about things like, how are we working with industry on different projects? What does that look like? What does it look like, beyond work integrated learning? What does it look like kind of from the student standpoint? Um, what does it mean for institutions to be working with industry partners? And Lindsay was the first person who came to mind when thinking about this. So I'm so happy that she could join us. If this is your first time here, I should have said this at the start. The first half hour of this will be used for Lindsay and I to ask some questions. And then the second half hour will be open 100% for you to ask questions. So have your questions ready. You can put them in the chat uh, throughout this entire time, or at the end, you can raise your hand and ask a question. But Lindsay, my first question for you, you were a speaker at Area University, which was our national conference talking about kind of institutional change in January in Ottawa. And you said, I pulled this directly from your slides. Universities and industry partner frequently, uh, universities and industry partner frequently and misunderstand each other reliably. Can you speak to what you mean by that? And where do those misunderstandings frequently show up?
yeah, for sure. I think I loved that title when I thought about it, and it was partly because the words are a little clumsy, and it actually, as you try to say it, it represents the challenge that university or post-secondary in general have with industry. We can use the same words, but we mean different things. And so there's this misunderstanding from the get-go because we're saying tomato versus tomato as an example. So, one of us hears tomato and one of us hears tomato. I think if I get underneath the hood, what does that mean? And so one of the very first things I did a survey leading into that workshop, so that I could understand perspectives from both industry and post-secondary. And one of the biggest things that was glaring and stood out was time horizon. So, and I think people on this call will for sure feel that. And there's all different reasons that we speak in different time horizons, but industry is often working in quarters. What can I do this quarter? They have to report to the shareholders every quarter on revenue and profit. Universities are often working in years. They're thinking about this grant as a 3-year funded project. And at the end of 3 years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes they're doing a longitudinal study. Sometimes it's working through students with a co-op. So it's a year long, as an example. And neither one is wrong, but it creates friction because that time horizon kind of sets the stage for momentum, decision making, and so on. So that's the first. The second would be, what does impact mean? And we see this often in grant applications where they're industry and post-secondary are partnering on that grant, and impact is the word of the decade probably. But what do we mean by impact? And what I saw in that survey and my own experience would be for post-secondary, impact is often around knowledge creation or publications and citations or getting more grant or talent development or just the number of partnerships that are involved. That could be the impact metric. Whereas for industry, it's very clearly down to revenue and profit. There's sometimes product development or adoption but with the outcome to be more profit. And that profit word does not show up typically when post-secondary is involved. And then the third, I would say, there's a few around. Actually, there's a couple more. I was gonna say there's only one more, but there's a couple more. But one is around value. So how is that communicated for sure? And we'll get into that, I think, in the conversation. Risk is another. And then the other one that I think is really coming to light right now is ownership of IP. And we saw the dismantling of some IP offices on university campuses that used to be a revenue generator for industry or for institutions as a whole. We see industry pushing back. And right now we see a push for, Canadian sovereign technology and innovation writ large, but who's going to own that is still in question. And I think IP is still, and sometimes it's about credit, but sometimes it's about control. And so figuring out which part of IP needs to be held by who, is it the credit or the control? And so when I named it that, or kind of wrapped my whole workshop around that, it was really partnerships from both sides feel like they're contributing to the project. And what happens is both sides walk away feeling a little disappointed often.
I think that leads in well to my next question for you. And, getting back to the absolute basic, why do post-secondary institutions and industries even partner together? If, a lot of their goals are pretty well, on average, like you just said, a lot of them are misaligned, revenue, impact, values. A lot of these things kind of don't really match each other. So why do they partner?
So it was interesting. The workshop there was a lot at the end of the workshop. The first half was me presenting. The second half was roundtable discussions on, okay, so how do we re-engineer partnerships for not just research, but it could be for talent pipeline development. It could be for training. It could be for research. It could be for facility use. And so, I had 10 questions and it was an hour conversation and they couldn't get past this. This is where they got hung up. So each table had industry and post-secondary representation at the table, and they got stuck on this. They couldn't define when it really came down to why they partner. And if we can't define why we partner, it's going to be really hard to figure out how to make it successful. And it really was, again, at a high level, the motivations sound aligned: access to talent, access to new knowledge, access to infrastructure, and solving real world problems. And most grants, as an example, are written around that. I worked on the CFREF for the University of Victoria, which was based fully on community partnerships. And absolutely all of those were baked in. But what happens is industry in that was, I'm here to solve a problem, reduce risk, and gain advantage, which is typically profit. PSIs, however, there was multiple things in those conversations that were coming up. Well, no, the main purpose of why is educating students. No, the main purpose is to advance knowledge, not necessarily to solve it today, but to solve it 10 years from now, or to contribute to society. But what does that mean? Are you saving a life today, or are you preparing to save a life 50 years from now with this? And increasingly demonstrating economic impact, but not necessarily profit. And so the partnerships drift to one side or the other, and one side is always having to compromise much more. And what we found is PSIs in particular are balancing extreme mission complexity, whereas industry, there's not as much complexity. So it was easier for them to articulate why they're here. I'm here to make money. That's pretty easy for industry to say. Like, the reason we partner, hands down, there's going to be a whole bunch of side things that are really fantastic, and we're going to put them on our billboards, and that's great. But at the end of the day, we're here to make sure there's more profit if we're industry. And universities have multiple missions, and therefore they have complexity that is really hard to deal with. So they're not necessarily they're not misaligned because they disagree wholeheartedly. They're misaligned because they're optimizing their processes and their purpose for different things, I would say.
It's not often in my line of work that I hear optimizing in universities in the same sentence, and pretty well ever, actually. I, like you mentioned, a lot of these institutions and organizations just really are drastically different. We spent the last summer with RBC and the Business Higher Education Roundtable doing roundtables across the country with industry, uh, university, college, government, and then kind of some NGO stakeholders who, and we were talking about, what should the future of post-secondary education look like? And like how, if we're talking about, things like commercialization and these partnerships really mean a lot, like how do we get there? And I think one of the biggest things that struck me was just how different we think about, different projects and like Lindsay used timelines as an example, but you know, sometimes industries think in things in terms of days versus, sometimes you are stuck in a Senate committee for a full year trying to put a program forward, let alone before you get to go through any form of QA. It's like the timelines are different. The bureaucracies are different. There's so many things that are different. I'd be curious, what are the factors that end up having successful partnerships? What leads to a successful partnership, given
Hmm.
that these things are very different?
Yeah, I think, oh, I have so many thoughts on all the things you said, Tiffany, for sure. And if anything's going to speed us up, it's the defense cycle that's happening right now, for sure. The urgency is real. I'm going off on a different tangent than what I thought I was going to say, so I'll get back to my real answer. But I had a board meeting last night, an AGM for the Kingston Yacht Club, and I don't know what his role is, but a senior leader at the military training, not RMC, but the senior officer training school in Kingston. I don't know what it's called, but he basically runs that facility. And he said the problem isn't getting more weapons or military things, it's the people to actually use them. He's like, we're going to get more rifles, but we don't have any arms to hold them, as an example. And that pipeline isn't there of the people. And that urgency isn't for 6 years from now. They actually ordered the weapons already, so they need the arms today. We can't wait to go through a Senate cycle, as an example, right? So that timeline, I was thinking about that last night. It was like, he's like, it takes 8 years to get a general. Like by the time they're trained to be a general in the military, it's an 8-year path. How do we accelerate that if we need them today? So that was fascinating to me. But when I think about what makes partnerships in general work and what I heard in the discussions at the Re-University conference is that the processes so we have two fundamental problems set up. The incentives are set up wrong from the get-go and post-secondary institutions. The incentives are around often not so much in the outcome as to contributing factors, or the outcome is a citation or a research publication or the community partnership or engagement of the community, not so much in the number of lives saved or number, and I'm going to give some examples at some point too today. But so I think we're incentivizing the wrong part of the partnership. And so I think that if we could figure out how to incentivize better, and some examples of that will help. The other one is processes. I think the partnerships are often an add-on, not the impetus. We fundamentally come up with a problem, and then we build a project plan, and then we find the industry partner that needs that solved, as opposed to, and some institutions, I would say Polytechs are pretty good at starting with what is the problem of the industry starts with the question, and then they find the institution to go help solve that. And there is some universities doing this for sure. But I think those are two things where I've seen it's better when the problem starts with industry. And then I would say when the incentives match what the goal of the partnership is. The other one that I think is useful is when there's a translator layer. When you start with somebody on the team that understands both sides. And what we often see in post-secondaries is people that have worked only in post-secondary for most of their life. And so it's really hard to put yourself in the shoes of the other side if you've never actually put those shoes on. And same thing on the other side. If you've only ever been in industry, you can't possibly understand how to work through the system or understand it. And what I find in industry is there's an impatience because of their time horizon to deal with that cycle. But if you have a translator layer, they can help articulate why, not just how, but the why those things are there and how it can benefit both sides. And so I think, one of the roles that when we think about incentives is we struggle to actually pay for administrators or project managers and projects, but are we also building in an industry liaison role that their whole job is to understand how to speak both sides? So those would be some of the things that I would build in. We over emphasize the partnerships are relationships. And so if partnerships are relationships, we're relying on individuals to have really good relationships instead of institutionalizing them so that they have longevity and turnover and that they are sustainable beyond that person. If that person leaves, that partnership leaves. And so how do we bake that in, I guess, would be the other one.
A lot of thoughts based off of that. I did my master's degree 2 years ago, and I took a class on research practice partnerships, and this was in the States, so the context is a little bit different. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, this class was run jointly by a ex-government um, equivalent to an RADMs and a prof from Harvard. And what they were talking about was how do you actually, have effective research practice partnerships? How do you do research and get it out into the world in a way that actually makes sense? And the biggest thing that they ended up talking about, kind of what the class ended up being around, is how do you be a knowledge broker in a way that makes sense? How do you be the person who can go talk to the nerds and bring it to the policy people? And how do you bring it out into the world? And how do you go vice versa? How do you bring, public commentary to the people who are doing things like, what is the statistical significance of this? And that was such an interesting, I think, mix of, here's the practical, but like how much of this actually is just a conversational piece, and how do you kind of operationalize, in a sense, conversation. Have you seen institutions? I'm going to pick on the university, college, polytechnic side. Have you seen institutions getting better at this over time?
I think I don't know. I don't know if they're getting better. I might, as I'm thinking out loud, I might get to that, but I have seen them try to tackle this question. Coming from a Marcom background, I have seen more and more institutions create research communication positions. And I've seen technical communication positions kind of come out of nowhere in the last, I would say, 7 years. When I started in Marcom, we focused more on brand marketing or bums and seats marketing, recruitment marketing. And over time, the role of technical research communications has, those departments are in some universities even larger than those other Marcom teams. And I think that's in an effort to support that knowledge translation to everyday people. I do think right now the trust factor, and this would be a whole other Friday conversation that you've probably had many times already, Tiffany, but the whole challenge of the sector right now and trust, public trust in universities as we're seeing it erode over time. And that's perhaps where some of the funding challenges are coming from, because oh gosh, I'm going down a total tangent here, but that's in part why governments have continually underfunded post-secondary institutions, is because their taxpayers are telling them it's not worth it. And so we have stopped communicating the value of post-secondary education in a way that is meaningful to everyday people. And some of that can be about the education their kids are getting. And I think some of that can be, this paper that we wrote is not about the paper we wrote. It's about the 10 lives that this research saves, right? And so we have to go back 10 years ago. What were the papers that were produced then that have now saved lives or protected something that's valuable? And I think the research comms, so if going down this world right now, the research comms is conveying right now what's happened, but I think there's value in saying, you remember that research we talked about 10 years ago? Here's what it's done since. Because back then it was really just a fundamental research finding, which is so critical to get to the next stage. But I think we'd benefit from saying, remember that research that seemed abstract? Here's what it actually did 10 years in the making.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm going to put in the chat, folks. I think one of maybe the most interesting, like, knowledge kind of sharing and storytelling that I've seen in my time. And this isn't so much, a formal research report. This was a Boston Globe, I think, Boston Globe article on what happened to valedictorians in Boston. And the way that they could have just put out a pretty boring article. It is storytelling, I think, at its finest. And I ended up in such a deep rabbit hole on this because of how well that this information was presented that if it had just been another news story, I'm going to be completely honest, I probably never even would have clicked. And so I wanted to share that because what you were saying, Lindsay, kind of brought my brain to that example. But speaking of examples, walk me through. What are some of the coolest and most interesting examples of institution industry relationships that you've seen?
So here's the truth. I'm going to answer a question that's slightly like that. I don't know if they're the coolest because they're going to be fully biased because there are 3 that I've been involved. No, I don't want to take credit for being the coolest, but I think they're really good practical ways. And this actually might even get a little bit to Janet's question, but not exactly. And then we can tackle Janet's question. But if I think about applied research, a great example years ago when I was teaching at St. Lawrence College, over the dinner table. And this is one of the things that I think is a big takeaway is we need to get academics thinking about when they're at the dinner table with friends that are in industry, that's where these things can start, not just once you're working at a grant and vice versa. We need industry when they're having, they're sitting on the sidelines at their kids' soccer practice and they're sitting next to an academic being like, hey, I have this fundamental problem I'm trying to solve, just to spend more time with each other to understand each other's world. But I was at dinner with one of my friends and he owns a machine fabrication company here, 3rd generation. It's a 200-year-old company. They produce a lot of equipment for Bombardier, as an example. So they're producing the equipment that Bombardier uses or Alcan used and so on. And he was talking about, and just friend to friend, that they had a massive labor shortage with millwrights, which is where it gets into the question that Janet posed, and that they weren't able to find millwrights. And I was like, that's interesting. And he's like, I think it's just harder and harder. And I wonder if you could run an ad campaign for us, is how it started, because I worked in advertising. And I was like, I don't think, I think it's going to be hard to target millwrights with an ad. So I need to figure this out. And I'm like, can I study the problem first? And then we'll figure out the best way to go after it. So I got a group of students together as my research assistants. We applied for a very small grant that supported college research, fundamental research, or applied research. We had 6 students working on this, and we looked at where are millwrights, who are they, what are they going after? And what we learned was that it was a hyper-competitive labor market where there was less millwrights than there were jobs available. And therefore, millwrights didn't have to look for jobs. There was no millwrights out there looking for jobs. There was no millwright unemployed at that time. So nobody's looking at job boards. So the more he posted on job boards, the more it was going unnoticed because millwrights were not looking at job boards. They were all employed and they had 5 offers every week. So I was like, oh, interesting. So how does he recruit? So we instead realized that the problem was to promote the quality of work-life balance and so on, the value within his organization, and then show that in places where millwrights were hanging out. And so we learned actually where do millwrights hang out? Well, they like to use tools. And so they were on, at that time, Kijiji all the time looking for tools. And so we actually posted an ad in Kijiji and we did a bunch of testing on this for free tools do you need access to free tools? And then we built that into their employment package that on weekends and evenings, they could take their tools home with them. And so we realized that doing another ad in LinkedIn or on a job board wasn't going to work because they weren't looking there. And that was all a research project. And so the bottom line was George A. Wright and Sons was the company. They got millwrights applying over and over to work for them. Most of them stayed and are still there because that loyalty was built on the culture fit. And they weren't wasting money on advertising because Kijiji was free. We just posted the job. We just posted this job there, and it wasn't really post a job. It was need free tools, as an example. And that was an applied research project that also did work integrated learning for the students, because then they were working in advertising, market research, and so on. So that was one example. And this was like 15 years ago, probably. So this was a long time ago. Another example that I have, which is more on that talent pipeline side. And this would have been at Queen's University. And I don't know if anybody from Queen's is on the call, but there's a program and it's since gone on to about 5 other universities in Canada. But it was called QCAC, the Queen's Career Apprenticeship Kingston program. And a donor came to us and said, I want to help with getting arts students jobs. Students graduating from arts are struggling. And when we look at our career acquisition rate, post-graduation 6 months out, every university uses that as a metric of look how great we are because our students get jobs post-grad. And we knew that our art students were struggling compared to others. This was about 7 years ago, 8 years ago now. And coming from economic development, I knew that there was always a concern about brain drain and how do we retain talent in our city, young, brilliant talent in our city. And we had a donor that wanted to put money in this. And so we developed a partnership, a 3-way partnership, industry, economic development, and the university. And the university was the donor. And the donor paid 1/3 of the student salary. The economic development agency paid 1/3, and they got separate funding for that. And the donor and the industry paid 1/3 of the student salary for 1 year to go work with them. The first year we did 8 students. The second year we did 15. I believe it's up to 40 students now that are funded to stay in Kingston. They get a full salary for that year. They open doors, and that's young people that we're retaining out of arts. Queen's also got that career acquisition rate went up because these students are getting employed in their fields immediately post-graduation. The donor felt very validated that their money was going into a good place. So that was another example where I saw a really unique partnership where it was a 3-way partnership, and it met everybody's needs. Industry got talent, Queen's got a donor happy, plus got their graduates getting hired, and the Economic Development Agency got to talk about that limiting the brain drain problem. So it was a 3-way win. And then we've got one more because I actually work for Invest Ottawa. And so I can't just be talking about what's good for higher ed. I do have to talk about what's good for why I'm here. And so Area X.0, which is that R&D complex, it's also got a smart farm on it. And we partner with Carleton University and Algonquin on that. And it's a whole bunch of things. The donor actually came to us from Algonquin. They used to own the farm and said, we want to donate it as long as you continue to help farmers adopt new technologies to help them adapt to the world today. We do that by bringing in full classes into the facility, but also research teams from Carleton. It's helping with research. It's helping with work integrated learning. It's helping to appease those donors on site. And so we have engineers on site that partner with the students who are there learning how to do the technology. They're using it for actual class outcomes. So some classes come and do their full projects there. And then individual students, grad students come and do their own research on site. And that to me is serving so many different avenues for both college and university and us and industry. So we've got about 8 industry partners that we're kind of the intermediary, but there's 8 industry companies that are also participating in this smart farm that are interacting every day on site. So that would be the third. I would say if I take all 3 of these, what the summary is these partnerships can be in unlikely places and in unlikely ways, and they can evolve and grow over time. But what is common is we start with what is the thing we're trying to solve together. So yeah, and they don't have to be big. Like the George A. Wright and Sons example, at the end of the day, the first year we got them 2 additional millwrights. But those 2 millwrights went on to build Teflon. So it was a pretty big impact.
Cool.
Or they were part of the Teflon team, I guess. Not fully themselves, but yeah.
So does that mean Teflon's Canadian?
Part of it. There's like one, yeah, there's one
Oh.
part of it, apparently. Yes.
You learn more things every single day. Folks, we are at the point where I'm going to open it up to audience questions. So, we'll start. We touched on Janet's question, but going to ask it out loud. Uh, Janet added some context in here about Canada needs a million skilled trade worker to enter the workforce over the next several years, which requires uh, who participates in trades. In the past, employers have had a greater responsibility on training. That role has been primarily handed to PSIs. Beyond applied research programs, how can post-secondary institution industry partnerships to bridge to employment for vocational students? What would a good incentive be for industry to become more committed to workforce development?
It for industry, it comes down to money, right? I recently was at a round table with Minister Quinn. For those in Ontario, he's our Minister of Post-Secondary Education and something, blah, 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 higher ed. Minister of Higher Ed. There's more in there, but and a bunch of post-secondary presidents were in the room. And then there was some industry partner or industry leaders in the room. And they actually talked about the challenge with hiring recent grads was because they're slower to adapt than AI is to the low-hanging fruit that they need for entry-level staff. And so they need incentives. And what they mean by incentives is money to support hiring recent grads to put up with the slow contribution or limited contribution they're making back to the company. So if they basically were asking Minister Quinn, if you want us to hire these recent grads and deal with their inefficiencies, we want to be paid to be part of their training pipeline, is basically what they're saying, because we can get what we need without bringing these people in. And so it all comes down to that value. And I know I'm oversimplifying it, and there's always going to be outliers for sure. But the incentive for industry is they have to report to their shareholders, especially if they're publicly traded, how this made money. And they do have a little bit of philanthropy if they have a foundation on the side. But industry's not in it for philanthropy. At the end of the day, they have shareholders, and that is what they have to report to. So good incentive is to say, we will pay you, right, to participate. And that's where we got the example of the QCAC program at Queen's was we will pay the salary for these students and then you could train them. That is one incentive. The incentive could be, and this is where I think apprenticeships were a good model. They're just not in all industries, and they're misunderstood in Canada because they're not the same as they have been or are in other countries, but we'll continue to train them over a lifetime. And so when you need them to learn something different, don't worry, we've got them and we'll go do some training with them. So you tell us, that was the apprenticeship model. You go get them to do some stuff, and then we'll train them a little bit to remember what they've learned and help them get ready for the next level. And I think some of that's been lost over time, and it only happens in certain sectors. So I don't know if that helps.
Yes, I think so. Jeff asked, "Is that partnership at Queen's still happening?" Um, and is Queen's perhaps looking to expand it to other faculties? It sounds like a fantastic initiative.
Yeah, I think it is. Let me Queen's career. I'll try to Google it and put it in the chat. Career Apprenticeship Program. And so if I can find it, I will put it in the chat. And I think they did end up, yeah, I just found it. They did look like they expanded it into the sciences. The reason it didn't expand into other faculties was because they have, I think, fundamentally, those are the students that were, well, one, that's what the donor asked. The donor's student, personal kids graduated from arts. And so, donors are often led based on personal experience. But I think fundamentally where he was coming from was that those are the students that don't have a directed career path, like an engineer student. Engineering has an engineering pathway. Whereas if you graduate from philosophy, you don't have a direct job. So I think that's why. it wouldn't stop other organizations from or other universities or post-secondaries or faculties adopting a similar model if they found the funding to do so.
Yeah, especially too, where I think a lot of employers, I don't think the thing about, we're not bringing students with kind of that quick adaptation to the workforce isn't just an arts problem or a business problem. I think you see it just as equally. You hear the commentary from hard sciences as well. You still have to train students when you get them in. Um, Navarre asked maybe the question of industry institution partnerships. With all of the federal immigration changes impacting post-secondary institutions, they pointed out specifically colleges and polytechnics in Ontario. I would extrapolate the broader country. How do you foresee this impacting industry institution partnerships going forward?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't given this one a thought, to be honest. Um, I think there may be some loopholes in getting around some of the immigration changes. Then I don't know if this is a good one. I hadn't thought about this. But to use partnerships as a model to still bring in foreign direct investment as an example, whether that's through student tuitions or other forms of funding sources. So there could possibly be a loophole through partnership and articulation agreements. I think we have seen um, uh, Prime Minister Carney, as he's going around the world right now, forming new partnerships country to country. What we're seeing him articulate in those press releases, and I don't know if you're keeping up with them, but post-secondary is finding its way back into what it means to partner with other countries, country to country. And so in almost every single one that he's done over the last 6 months, there has been one component of the press release that relates to post-secondary, and I think that's promising. So perhaps we're starting to see the value of post-secondary being translated to taxpayers if the Prime Minister feels that there's value in him talking about it at that level on a regular basis. Um, I think I don't know actually, Navarre. I think that's a great question, and now I need to take that away and actually think about it. I'd love to just keep talking about it, but I don't think I have a good sense of how that could change. Um, yeah, I don't think so. I did notice there was another question. Larry expanded on Janet's question too. Um, that and it's very similar, but that private sector it's that dichotomy, right? Where they want talent, but they don't want to wait for talent, or they don't want to pay for the talent. And it's this catch-22. I think that ties a little bit into micro-credentials, and I've been working with IBU a little bit, which is a private funded business school, nonprofit, but on just that question. How do we create credentials that are the future of the workforce and are wanted by industry? And it is a catch-22 because until they're mainstream, they're not necessarily valued. And I think that's also partly in the comms around it. We don't have a clear pathway on what it means to have a micro-credential. I have a whole bunch. I have 5 micro-credentials, but they're all different. Like one I got from lynda.com, but technically it was sold to me as a micro-credential. So is it a micro-credential? And one of them I got from the U of A, right? But on Coursera was the Indigenous Canada program. Is that a micro-credential or is that a course? I got one on applied AI from Rotman, but it was through the continuing education program. Is that a micro-credential or is that just professional development? And so I think, again, that misunderstanding of what it means. Right now, I think these are a beautiful bonus, but they wouldn't even pass an AI chatbot as educated, right? When we have to submit, do you meet the minimum education requirements? If you look at job postings right now, there is still 80% of job postings still have a minimum required education as part of it. And sometimes that's only a college, sometimes it's only a high school, but that's still a checkbox. And that checkbox, when you look behind in the database of what they're looking for, is a certain form of credential. A micro-credential is never showing up as the minimum education. And so until that shifts culturally, micro-credentials are a nice bonus. They're like professional development.
I will be interested to see the day, if there is a day, where we have micro credentials as requirements as opposed to traditional degree path. I'm very intrigued to see if or when that occurs. I mean, I look at places like Singapore and, they're
Yes.
there. Like they
Yeah.
that is a thing for them. That is they have it
Yes.
mapped. It's gorgeous. It's fantastic. And I feel like we're years off. I did get another question. 99% of industry partners in Canada are small and medium organizations. One of the biggest challenges are matching funds required to engage in research and development. 'Cause small and medium organizations. Aside from lobbying federal granting agencies or fundraising, are there any ideas to kind of raise funds for these initiatives if you're a small, medium business?
To raise funds, I mean, yeah, the businesses don't really raise funds. Typically, grants, there isn't really financial incentives. Businesses go get customers. That's how they pay their bills 99% of the time. There are some tax incentives and so on. I think one of the ways, though, that you can impact the bottom line if you're working in industry, and I think something that was untapped in my survey was sharing of facilities. So many post-secondary institutions, and we're seeing this shift over time, but many post-secondary facilities sit empty a lot of the time. After 8 p.m., some after 5 p.m. Weekends are often empty on campus, and definitely in the summer, they go down to like 50% use case. Industry doesn't follow those same timelines, right? I go into my building, Bayview, at 11 p.m., and there will be 80 founders working at 11 p.m. In the space, like 80. This isn't one or two, like 80 people are working at 11 p.m., right? And so there is an opportunity to say, this is how we're going to pay you to participate in our project is we're going to give you access to our facilities at 11 p.m. And then industry has something they're gaining from that partnership. And in turn, we get access to your data to do the research project on it. And that's the trade-off. And that still impacts industry's bottom line because they just got access to free space and facilities that they don't have to invest in. And so it's not necessarily putting cash in hand, but it's giving them a financial incentive to participate in the partnership. And I think facilities and access to infrastructure is one of the most underutilized opportunities for partnerships.
If you had to give the post-secondary side one piece of advice when it comes to approaching industry partnerships, what would it be?
What would I say? I would probably, I would say stop, and this kind of came out of that session too, is stop treating partnerships as a universal expectation. And we had a meeting recently with Shirk that funds mostly arts and humanities for fundamental research. And on every single grant application, researchers and academics have to say what they're doing for partnerships. And this will be true with CHIR and with NSERC as well. And so stop making it a universal expectation and start treating it as specialized capability. Some researchers are going to do long-term longitudinal 10-year studies, and their output is going to be citations and publications that future researchers will use. And other researchers are going to partner with industry because that's what they are really good at. Because what you're doing by making it a fundamental for everybody to have to partner is you're for sure setting up that some will fail, and that's putting like an X through industries not wanting to. You're reinforcing why it doesn't work because they're hearing about the failures. And if you treat it that some are really good at it and invest heavily in them as being partner-driven, impact-based projects, and let others have different incentives and different purpose of why they're doing this research, as an example. And this could be true whether it's about work-integrated learning too. Some are going to do it really well through simulations, and some are going to do it really well in the field. And don't make them do both. If you're good at doing it as a simulation, keep it there. And if you're really good at doing it in the field, do it there. And so partners don't scale based on this enthusiasm or because you put it as a checkbox on a grant. They scale because of design. So start with what makes sense. We don't need this for everybody. We need it for some to be really good at it. I think And if I go back to where we started, I think we have to get clear on why we partner, because that'll help define who should be doing partnerships and who shouldn't, which projects should be about partners and which ones shouldn't. And I think if we do that, partnerships will be less fragile to failure, and they'll become foundational to some of the work we do.
I want to go back to something that Janet's continued on with a few comments, but what about the bottom comment here? BC youth unemployment, 25%, is wild. That is massively high. I think one of the things that I would be interested in is, chicken and the egg. Employers want talent with experience. How do students get experience? Where does things like work integrated learning fit into that? How can we leverage better university industry partnerships maybe to get students experience in the ways that maybe bridge that gap better than they are right now? Is there a way? I don't know the answer to this. This is
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to start with why we're partnering again, but I think you have to think, what is the value to industry? They're not in the world of philanthropy, so they're not going to do it just because they feel good about doing it. That's not why business exists. We live in a capitalist society. Capitalism rules even when we don't want it to. And this ties a little bit into Nick's comment, which I'll get to. But an example of how it could be done different, and it solves the small business thing as well. Back when I was teaching at St. Martin's College, I participated because I'd been in industry for so long. I knew so many businesses in the local market. And so I actually went out to, and this relies heavily on each individual faculty, and that's where it fails, because you need this to actually be systematic and built in to your system, so it doesn't rely on the individual. But I went out to one of the business owners in Kingston. She owned 4 stores downtown. And I had students go and not just get to know those businesses, but they drew out of a hat. They got to know all 4 businesses. They drew out of a hat which business they were going to do this for. And they actually ran a marketing campaign, not wrote a brief. They didn't write a plan. They didn't picture what they would do. They actually, instead of putting money into a textbook, they put their $100 that would have been on a textbook into a marketing campaign and ran the marketing campaign for her for 6 weeks. And at the 3-week mark, we did an analysis, and in most cases, they were all going to sell 1 million things for their store. And at the end of their 3 weeks, they hadn't sold a single thing or brought a single customer into her store. And so that was a really good, learning experience for those students. It was advertising to go, oh, wow, it takes more than I thought. And then we did that analysis. They pivoted. They told her how they were going to pivot. They did the last 3 weeks. And then they gave all that research to her. This is what we learned. This worked. This didn't. This is what we think you should do if you're going to scale this. She got all that, but it took a lot of trust on her part. And that was built because her and I had known each other for 10 years, that she trusted me to be the guardian of her brand's 4 stores, through this exercise to guide these students by doing these advertising campaigns. But that provided those students, they had not just, I've gone to school for marketing, I've ran a marketing campaign and I can tell you what the results look like and what I would do different. So they actually had that. They had actually played in Google Analytics in this case, and they knew how to report on a marketing campaign in a real tool. Part of that was they had to go get their Google Analytics certificate, which is not a St. Martin's College certificate. This is a real life certificate that added to their resume, and that was part of the course. I didn't make them pay for a textbook. I made them pay for part of real world learning. And that was an example, again, of that industry post-secondary partnership that drove bottom line for Cindy. She did make a few sales. So Cindy did get revenue. I don't think she made profit off of it, but she got revenue. She got a lot of information to further revenue down the road. She did feel like she did something good for the students. She also got to test talent that she could hire. So she used it almost as a working interview too. So out of that, she got to know a few students. She brought some of them on as staff going forward. One of them became our social media coordinator for her 4 stores, and so on. And so that to me is an example of where we could do it a little bit better.
Fantastic. Lindsey,
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any last words before uh, we wrap up?
I do. I have one that I was thinking about,
Sure.
um, and this is what's keeping me up at night a little bit, is it makes sense when I talk about the example with college, it totally makes sense. That is what when you think about the fundamental, if you go back to the incorporation papers of a college or of a polytech, how they were born, the reason they were born out of supporting industry. That is their fundamental purpose, is to solve industry problems. That is, and that's why they are local. That's typically why their student pool comes from a 160-kilometer radius from their physical location. That's why their programs are typically aligned to the industries that they're near. That's all why colleges exist. So it's really easy for them to figure out how to do these partnerships, right? They are there to serve the local needs of industry. Universities were set up fundamentally for a different purpose. They weren't set up to drive industry. That wasn't why they existed. It was almost the opposite, right? They were there to think about the big questions. They were there to challenge basic assumptions of how the world works. They were there to help explore the unknowns, not solve the knowns. They were there to think about what others don't see or haven't asked. And that's a fundamentally different purpose. And yet, right now, we're asking them to fit in the same box as the colleges. And it's like going to colleges and saying, hey, wait, can you stop solving industry needs and start asking questions we've never thought to ask before? And colleges have never been asked to think about questions we've never asked before. And I think we need to step back as society and say, is that actually what we're asking universities? Is that what we want? Is that what I want my taxpayers to go to? Is I want 2 types of institutions doing the same thing? And right now, everything would point to yes, that is what we need. But I think we're going to lose something because universities are really good at depth. They're really good at fundamentally understanding something really deep. And colleges are really good at understanding everything on the surface. And I think there is some risk in looking at only partnerships that solve today's problems because we'll lose keeping track of solving tomorrow's problems. Because so that's something I don't know the answer to that, but that's what's keeping me up at night is as we're asking them to do more specific to industry outcomes, especially profit-driven cycles, short-term cycles, we're losing what makes universities really unique and special.
Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you, everyone who joined. Uh, this recording will be on YouTube probably Monday. Um, and if there's any other topics you want to hear about in Focus Friday, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at TMacLennan, TMacLennan at higheredstrategy.com. We're back every other Friday. And our next conversation is actually going to be about how do you kind of expand on graduate student training? So, what does expansion of mentorship look like? What is things like how do you prepare for things more than just the traditional academic pathway look like? So, should be an exciting conversation. And based on your comments when you registered, apparently IP will be a topic. So that means I have to go learn something about IP first. But thank you all for coming. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Amazing. Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks, everyone.